I mean, just imagine for a second that you pitched a television network, a show where a guy in a plain black suit just stares at a guest for like 4 straight hours.
They throw you out.
Right. He barely speaks. He lets the silence stretch until it's almost, uncomfortable, and you're just pitching this to an executive. You would be laughed completely out of the room.
Absolutely.
And then imagine you turn around and pitch a daily global news broadcast that completely ignores Western narratives, like entirely focuses on an unapologetic India-first perspective.
Yeah, they tell you the market simply doesn't exist for that.
Exactly. But the crazy thing is those two exact formats are they're currently dominating digital media. They haven't just found an audience, they've fundamentally rewired how we all consume complex information.
Well, I mean, it is a massive structural failure of traditional media, really. Because for decades, the assumption was always that audiences just had the attention span of goldfish.
Right, the whole 15-second soundbite thing.
Exactly. And the algorithmic architecture of the internet kind of doubled down on that. It optimized for friction, for outrage, and absolute brevity. But what these two creators have proven is that there is this massive, underserved demographic out there.
This global audience of learners.
Yes.
Yeah.
People who are starved for actual substance because people are exhausted by the endless 15-second hot takes. They don't really want more information. They want clarity. They want depth.
Which brings us to our mission for today. We are taking a deep dive into the architecture of two completely distinct digital media titans. We're looking at Lex Fridman and Palki Sharma Upadhyay.
Two very different styles.
Night and day. And to do this, we're relying on two deeply detailed biographical profiles that were published in 2026 on the Netizen blog by Paramendra Kumar Bhagat.
Fantastic sources, by the way.
Yeah, incredibly granular. They give us a real look at Lex's long-form, unhurried curiosity, and then Palki's crisp, assertive geopolitical analysis. So for you listening, understanding these two contrasting styles is basically a masterclass in how complex info is consumed today. Okay, let's unpack this.
Where are we starting?
I want to start with Lex Fridman because, his model works because he commands his own economics. But to really understand those economics, you have to understand the mind behind it all. I mean, this isn't a guy who went to broadcasting school.
Oh, far from it. No, to understand the whole Lex Fridman phenomenon, you really have to look at the incredibly rigorous traditional academic foundation that he built his platform on.
Right.
So he was born, Alexei Fridman, in 1983. This was in Chkalovsk, in the Tajik Soviet Socialist Republic. And he was raised in Moscow.
Wow.
Yeah. And his family immigrated to the United States around 1994, settling in the Chicago area right after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So he was about 11 years old at the time.
What a massive culture shock that must have been.
Oh, undoubtedly. And the intellectual environment of that household was just intense. His father, Alexander Fridman, is a highly renowned plasma physicist. He eventually became a professor at Drexel University.
See, I always wonder what growing up with a plasma physicist actually does to a kid's brain.
Probably changes everything.
Right. You aren't just learning facts. You are literally learning how to perceive reality. It frames the world as this complex system of interactions that are just waiting to be understood rather than, a series of events to be judged.
That's a great way to put it.
So it makes perfect sense that Lex followed a deeply analytical path himself. I mean, he went to Drexel University, earned his Bachelor of Science, his Master's, and ultimately his PhD in computer science.
And he wasn't just studying generalized IT either.
No. He was deeply specialized in machine learning, human-centered artificial intelligence, biometrics, perception systems.
And that specialization, that is the engine of his entire methodology. After a brief stint at Google working on machine learning projects, he joined MIT, this was in 2015, as a research scientist.
Right.
His specific focus at MIT was on human-AI interaction, autonomous vehicles, and deep learning. I mean, he basically spent his days figuring out how humans and complex algorithmic machines interpret one another.
He was literally building the future. But then, in 2018, he starts this side project, the MIT Artificial Intelligence Podcast.
Right, which is just crazy to think about now.
Yeah. Initially, it's just him talking to other researchers, and it is highly technical, deeply esoteric material. But over time, he sheds the MIT moniker, becomes the independent Lex Fridman podcast, and the scope just explodes.
It really did.
By 2019, he lands this massive inflection point interview with Elon Musk, and suddenly he's a global phenomenon. But here's the mechanical question I keep getting stuck on with Lex.
Okay, what is it?
Well, a traditional cable news interview is maybe 5 to 7 minutes long, right? Yeah, they get in, force a clash of talking points, and get out. Lex's episodes are like these slow-cooked, multi-course private seminars that last 3 to 4 hours. So how did a format that defies literally every single rule of social media engagement actually end up conquering the attention economy?
What's fascinating here is that the lack of a time limit is not a failure to edit. It is actually a weaponized freedom.
Weaponized freedom. I like that.
Yeah, because when you remove the ticking clock, the entire psychological dynamic of the interview completely changes. The guest sits down and realizes, oh, I don't have to compress my life's work into a tiny soundbite.
Right. They can actually breathe.
Exactly. They relax. The ideas evolve organically. And the algorithm, which, historically rewarded short bursts of engagement, eventually adapted to reward raw watch time.
Ah, right.
If you can keep a viewer engaged for 3 hours, YouTube's infrastructure will prioritize you above everything else. But you can only hold that attention if you have the intellectual credibility to actually drive the conversation. Lex isn't a host reading off a teleprompter. He's an insider.
I really want to push on that insider concept, actually, because the source points out his early 2026 State of AI episode. This was with Nathan Lambert and Sebastian Roshka.
Oh, that's a brilliant example.
Yeah, the profile notes he casually discusses things like set theory and scaling laws in large language models. And wait, just so we don't leave anyone listening behind, when the profile mentions scaling laws and LLMs, it's basically talking about the mathematical formula of how adding more data and computing power makes the AI predictably smarter, right?
That's exactly it, yes.
Okay, so Lex isn't just asking these guys, what is AI? He's actively debating the actual underlying math of its future.
Precisely. Because scaling laws dictate that as you increase the parameters of a neural network, its performance improves in a very mathematically predictable way. And set theory is the fundamental branch of mathematical logic that deals with collections of objects.
Which is foundational to how algorithms categorize data.
Exactly. So when Lex brings up these concepts, he isn't just trying to sound smart for the camera. He is speaking the native language of his guests. He brings the listener into the lab with him.
It democratizes access to elite ideas.
It really does, because he forces the experts to explain their complex math to a peer who then translates it, just through his pacing, to the broader audience.
That makes so much sense, but it also sounds, incredibly risky.
How so?
Well, if you don't have a ticking clock and you're just letting brilliant people talk about set theory, how do you prevent the guest from just rambling endlessly?
Right.
It requires a very specific temperament to control a room like that without interrupting. And the source material really emphasizes his intellectual humility. He approaches every conversation, whether he's talking to Mark Zuckerberg or a historian, as a curious student.
And the mechanism behind that humility is just grueling preparation. I mean, the Netizen profile details that he spends days doing serious homework before an episode. Days. He reads the guests' academic papers, he reads their books, he watches their prior interviews. He processes all of this data to craft open-ended questions that actually invite elaboration.
Wow.
It's a style of empathetic listening. He treats the conversation like an open-source code base. He lets the guest write the logic, while he just occasionally inputs a new variable to see where the system goes.
Okay, but isn't that kind of a cop-out?
What do you mean?
Well, this is a heavy critique in today's polarized climate, and the source material directly addresses it. Critics argue that Lex's non-confrontational style gives controversial guests unchecked room to speak.
Yes, that is a very common criticism.
Right, because if he is a highly intelligent scientist, shouldn't he use that intellect to call out falsehoods in real time? By simply listening and not vigorously challenging certain viewpoints, he might inadvertently validate them.
It is a vital criticism to examine.
Right.
And, we are looking at it strictly as a mechanical choice in media today, not taking a side on the politics of his guests whatsoever.
Of course, purely the mechanics of it.
But the profile notes his explicit defense of this method. His stated goal is, and I quote, exploration, not interrogation.
Exploration, not interrogation.
Exactly. Because from a psychological perspective, aggressive journalistic pushback often triggers a defensive response. The guest just retreats into their rehearsed talking points.
You're right, they put their shields up.
Exactly. By refusing to attack, Lex removes that friction. Often, letting someone speak entirely uninterrupted reveals the true logical flaws or even the profound depth of their argument, far better than a screaming match ever could.
That makes sense.
He's offering a modern salon for ideas. He's focusing on understanding the human condition rather than, scoring ideological points.
And the economics of his platform prove that millions of people value that exact approach. Let's look at the business model for a second, because Lex operates entirely on the creator economy model,
Totally independent.
completely untethered from network executives. He relies on YouTube advertising, direct fan support through Patreon and PayPal, and integrated sponsorships.
Which are huge for him.
Massive. The source notes that his sponsorships bringing in brands like Palm and Linode command anywhere from $10,000 to over $50,000 per spot.
That's incredible.
It is. And by 2026, his estimated net worth is sitting somewhere between $5 to $8 million.
And that economic independence is basically the protective shell around his format.
Yeah.
I mean, if you were employed by a traditional network, executives would look at a 4-hour interview and demand it be cut into 12 segments with commercial breaks.
Oh, they'd manufacture conflict just for the ratings.
Exactly. The creator economy allows him to sustain a really high-quality production with full video, transcripts, a dedicated team without ever compromising the integrity of the conversation.
Which affords him the luxury of privacy, really, and creative control. The sources point out that he relocated to Austin, Texas in 2021 specifically to get more creative freedom.
Right, joining that whole Austin creator migration.
Yeah. And he's notorious for keeping his personal life quiet, though we do get these fascinating glimpses of the human behind the roboticist.
Oh, definitely.
Like, he plays guitar and piano, he actually does Pink Floyd covers, he practices martial arts, and there was this lighthearted moment from a 2024 Instagram post where he joked about his goal of having 4 or more kids, despite having 0 at the time.
It really highlights a profound irony about him.
What's that?
Well, you have a man who has dedicated his entire academic life to artificial intelligence, robotics, human-machine interaction. He literally studies the mechanics of how machines might eventually replicate human thought.
Right.
Yet his cultural legacy is built on the unrelenting prioritization of raw, unhurried, deeply human connection. He uses the most advanced digital infrastructure on the planet to foster analog humanity.
Man, that is the perfect pivot point. Because Lex's model works because he commands his own economics through long-form philosophical exploration. But, and this is what really gets me, does that same independence work if your goal isn't an unhurried exploration of the human condition, but hard, daily, granular news?
That is the big question.
Right, and that is what fascinates me about the second subject of our deep dive today. Palki Sharma Upadhyay. She operates in a completely different stylistic reality. If Lex is the sprawling seminar, Palki is the surgical strike.
Oh, she is the absolute master of the crisp, assertive, global voice, no question. And just as Lex's style was forged by his background in physics and computer science, Palki's style is the direct result of a relentless, culturally specific grind.
Let's get into her background then.
So she was born in 1982 in Palani, Rajasthan, and raised in Delhi. And she comes from a family that really emphasized excellence. Her father was a former Indian cricketer, and her mother was a noted beautician.
The familial pressure there is such an interesting detail to me. The source says her father initially steered her toward medicine, but she really gravitated toward language.
Thank goodness she did.
Right. She studied at Loreto Convent, earned her master's in communication and journalism, and even secured a C1 level French certification.
Which is incredibly difficult.
It is. And knowing multiple languages, I think it changes your cognitive framing. It allows you to process information through different cultural lenses before you ever synthesize it for an audience.
Absolutely. And she needed that expansive linguistic and analytical arsenal because her entry into media was at the absolute ground level.
Tell me about it.
In 2002, she started at Doordarshan, which is India's public broadcaster, and her starting salary was 800 rupees per month.
800 rupees a month. That is a grind.
A massive grind. From there, she moved to print journalism at the Hindustan Times in 2004. And print journalism is crucial here.
Why is print so important for someone who ends up on TV?
Because it teaches the mechanics of copy editing, of stripping away unnecessary adjectives and finding the structural core of a story. You learn to be concise.
Oh, that makes total sense. Then she makes the leap to CNN News 18 in 2005, and this is where she learns to compile massive global data. Right. She covered Barack Obama's presidential campaign, Iraqi refugees, and Tibetans in India. But how did that specific field experience at CNN News 18 actually train her to build the global narrative she's known for today?
Well, it forced her to navigate the massive and often really unwieldy apparatus of Western-dominated news gathering.
Okay.
When you were out on the ground covering Iraqi refugees or Tibetan exiles, you were gathering raw, unstructured human data. But she had to filter that data through a network structure that historically prioritized Western interests.
Oh, I see.
She learned exactly how the sausage was made, which allowed her to see exactly where the structural gaps in the global narrative actually were.
And that gap basically became her entire empire, which leads up to what the source calls the Gravitas era.
Yes, the turning point.
In 2016, she joins WION World as One News' managing editor and launches her flagship show, Gravitas. She starts pulling in millions of views for her coverage of incredibly dense topics, like the Russia-Ukraine conflict and Asian geopolitics.
Huge topics.
Massive. And my theory on how she pulls this off is that she relies heavily on negative space.
What do you mean by negative space?
Well, she cuts out the traditional opposing viewpoint debates, where two pundits just yell at each other for 10 minutes on a split screen.
Right, the classic cable news format.
Exactly. She cuts that entirely and instead uses that safe time to layer historical context. Am I on the right track there?
You are looking right at the mechanism. If we connect this to the bigger picture, she essentially operates like a high-end algorithmic compiler.
Okay, I love a good tech analogy. Explain that.
Think about when a software compiler runs. It takes a massive, unstructured data set of raw code, it strips out the errors and the redundancies, and it outputs a clean, highly efficient executable file.
Okay.
Palki takes a tangled web of global treaties, historical grievances, economic data, and she strips out the corrupted code of emotional rhetoric and partisan punditry. And she outputs a clean 10-minute narrative. Every single sentence is load-bearing.
Every sentence is load-bearing. That's a brilliant way to describe her pacing. And the lens through which she compiles that data is what really makes her so unique.
Her specific worldview.
Right. She brought an unapologetic India-first perspective to world events. And we should really clarify here, this isn't just a personal preference. It was a deliberate structural correction to the global market.
Exactly.
Historically, international news was dominated by networks based in London or New York. Palki provided a framework for understanding global events from the perspective of the Global South.
She realized that hundreds of millions of people felt completely alienated by mainstream international discourse.
Right.
So when she broke down the Russia-Ukraine conflict, she wasn't just echoing the talking points from Washington or London. She was analyzing the supply chain impacts on Asia, the historical hypocrisy of Western sanctions, and the shifting power dynamics of the BRICS nations.
It's a completely different angle on the same event.
It is. However, just as with Lex, we must impartially address the criticisms of her specific lens.
Right, of course. The Netizen profile notes that while her supporters praise her fearless debunking of Western narratives, some critics describe her perspective as overtly nationalistic.
Which is a heavy critique in journalism.
Yeah. They argue that her intense focus on an India-first framing can sometimes shade the objectivity of her international reporting.
And again, we are just mapping the terrain here without taking a side.
Absolutely, no sides.
But the structural reality is that all news is filtered through a lens. Palki's innovation wasn't inventing a bias, it was publicly owning her perspective.
Oh, that's interesting.
She replaced the illusion of the view from nowhere with a transparent, highly researched, geographically grounded viewpoint. And despite those critiques, her commitment to fact-based storytelling has resonated on a massive, massive scale, leading to unprecedented digital dominance.
Which brings us to the mechanics of transferring an audience from a legacy network to a digital brand. Because in 2023, she moved to Network 18's digital platform, First Post, to anchor shows like Vantage, Flashback, and Between the Lines.
That has become huge YouTube hits.
Massive hits. And she proved that her viewers weren't loyal to the WION and television channel. They were loyal to her analytical framework. The audience followed the mind, not the network.
Right.
And that culminated in a really monumental decision. On January 29, 2026, after 25 years in mainstream journalism, she stepped down as managing editor of First Post.
Which was a huge shock to the industry.
Yeah, the reports indicate she is pursuing independent media opportunities, seeking total creative control.
And that is the natural evolution of the creator economy.
Yeah.
Once you realize you have the trust of the audience, The corporate infrastructure just becomes a liability rather than an asset. She no longer needs a network to reach the world.
She is the network. And, the multidimensional person behind that fierce news desk persona is fascinating, too. The source points out she is incredibly multi-talented off camera.
She really is.
She balances this intense geopolitical analysis with interior design, cooking, painting pots. She reads voraciously books ranging from historical texts like Indian Summer to memoirs like Angela's Ashes.
And didn't she launch a clothing brand too?
Yeah, she launched her own sari brand, Revia. And she does all of this while navigating a joint family life with her husband, journalist Sanket Upadhyay, and their 2 kids, including her daughter Manya.
It is a vital reminder, really, that her on-screen sharpness is fueled by a very broad, diverse engagement with the world.
You can't just live in a newsroom.
Exactly. You cannot synthesize complex global narratives if your only input is a newswire. Her linguistic skills, her literary diet, her entrepreneurial ventures, all of it feeds into her ability to communicate with clarity.
So we have these 2 titans. Lex Fridman, the master of the sprawling, unhurried, deeply empathetic exploration, and Palki Sharma Upadhyay, the master of the meticulously pre-broadcast, synthesized, crisp geopolitical strike.
Stylistically, they are the architectural opposites of one another.
Complete opposites. Yet their massive success in the 2026 media landscape reveals a shared foundational philosophy about you, the audience.
And that shared value is a profound respect for the learner. Lex absolutely refuses to dumb things down for the sake of brevity. If it takes him and a guest 3 hours to explain the mechanics of a neural network, he trusts that you have the intellectual stamina to follow along.
Right.
And Palki refuses to muddy the waters with fluff. She trusts that you can handle complex, unvarnished realities about global supply chains or border conflicts without needing any emotional theatrics.
They both offer a sanctuary from the algorithmic outrage we started this conversation with. And I think for anyone listening who is actively trying to build a well-rounded understanding of the world, consuming both of these styles is kind of the ultimate cognitive toolkit.
Oh, absolutely.
You need the deep, unhurried exploration of Lex to understand the philosophical and technical underpinnings of where humanity is going. But you also desperately need the sharp, high-end algorithmic compiler of Palki Sharma to understand the immediate, fast-moving realities of the world as it exists today.
This raises an essential question about the broader ecosystem, though.
What's that?
If the most trusted, highly viewed voices on critical issues like AI and geopolitics are independent creators, people who rely on their own personal credibility rather than a corporate banner, we are witnessing a massive decentralization of trust.
The legacy news networks are facing an existential crisis.
The institution is literally being replaced by the individual.
Wow. To bring it all together, we have explored how Lex Fridman took the rigorous mathematical foundation of MIT and applied it to the unstructured realm of digital audio,
Right.
proving that curiosity and empathy can scale to millions when you just remove the ticking clock.
Right.
And we've dissected how Palki Sharma took the grueling discipline of a 25-year newsroom career, filtered it through a multilingual India-first lens, and forged it into a razor-sharp digital platform that redefines how the world parses geopolitical data.
Both prove that if you treat your audience as intelligent, capable humans, they will follow you anywhere.
Exactly.
As we wrap up, I want to leave you with one final provocative thought regarding the underlying mechanics of all this communication.
Okay, lay it on me.
We are moving rapidly into an era where artificial intelligence can flawlessly summarize daily news. It can generate hyper-realistic synthetic audio that eliminates every pause, every stutter, every tonal imperfection.
True.
In a world defined by flawless algorithmic perfection, will the very flaws of human communication become the ultimate premium luxury?
Oh, that's heavy.
Think about Lex's long, thoughtful, sometimes awkward silences while he searches for the exact right mathematical term. Or think about Pelkey's distinct, passionate cadence and her highly subjective personal lens. Is human authenticity, with all of its unhurried pacing and its sharp edges, the one thing algorithms can never truly replicate?
Wow. I really struggle with that because it means our human imperfections, the friction in how we speak, the pauses, the biases, are actually going to become the new gold standard of trust.
Precisely.
The flawless AI might give you the data, but the murky, beautiful human reality is exactly what we need to actually understand it.
Couldn't agree more.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the mechanics behind what you watch, keep learning, and remember to intentionally curate your own media diet. Until next time.